Volvemos, perdón por algunas demoras
Okay,
técnicas
we're back.
durante la tarde de hoy. Ahora les quiero presentar a un gran amigo mío que
We're
está en
back.
Estados Unidos.
I'm gonna introduce you to a
Él,
friend
una
of mine
característica especial es
that
que
is
él
in
es
the
abogado,
US.
cosa que no es muy común encontrar.
He's an engineer, he's a lawyer at the
Y
same
con él nos
time.
nuestro lado ingenieril de las
And
cosas.
we get
Pero es
along
un gran
very
abogado
well
también. Él
because
vive
we
en Estados Unidos,
understand,
cerca
or
de
we
Miami.
share the same
Él se
opinion.
llama
He
Michael
lives
Palage
close to
y él
Miami.
es
His name
especialista en
is
temas
Michael Palace.
credenciales
And he's
digitales
going to be
y
introducing
aspectos legales y
identities and
técnicos de Internet,
verified
lo que en la jerga inglés se llama
credential
digital
ID,
identity o identidad
digital
digital.
identity.
Y para esto me va a ayudar mi querida amiga
And
Tina.
my friend
Es una de las
Tina
chicas
is
TIC
going to help
que
me.
me va a ayudar a
It's one of the
hacerle
ICT
preguntas al final
girls
a Mike
who's
porque
going to
yo
help
tengo
me.
que sumarme a otra actividad virtual que sucede en
And
Colombia.
I have to join another
Hola
session
Tina,
that is
hello
going
Mike,
on in
nice to see
Colombia.
you
Hello,
here.
Mike. Nice to see
How are
you
you doing?
virtually.
Hi Tina. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well, Olga. Yes.
How are you? I love
Hola.
those clocks behind your you have
Yeah.
because you're a real international professional, so you work all over the world all the time. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. It's a pleasure having you here. We have worked together in a project last year, and we enjoyed working together. And we're always in touch. And Mike, with very he reviewed the program the other day, and he said this is an interesting issue that you should take consideration on. And he has been investigating and working on it. So Mike, thank you very much for devoting some time to address your knowledge and your presentation to our students. We have 500 fellows from all over the world. Usually we have many from the Americas, but now as it's virtual, we have from all the continents, all the countries. So, and we have translation Spanish and English. So I will give the floor to both of you. Maybe Tina can make some remarks first, and then Mike can follow. Unfortunately, as I said, I must be virtually in another place. But then Tina will close with the questions, and then Adrian will finish the day. So I will say goodbye for now. Thank you very much for being with us. Ciao, Mike, and Tina, over to you.
Gracias, Olga. Antes que de presentarlo a Michael, quería comentarles que al final del panel vamos a tener un tiempo para preguntas y que me lo pueden hacer en español y yo lo traduzco para que Michael lo entienda en inglés y él lo va a responder en inglés. Pero si se sienten más cómodos haciendo la pregunta en español, más que feliz de ayudarlos a traducirlo, ¿sí? Lo pueden hacer, yo tengo acceso, así que lo puedo hacer en el Q&A o en los comentarios. Bueno, para empezar este panel, quería... Okay, let me go and switch into English. You know, with the pandemic, we are forced to stay home. And basically, our interaction is to the world is through the device. I mean, we work online, we learn online, we shop online, we socialize online. Now we have legal procedure online. Everything is, you know, government paperwork online. So everything is online. And so, given that all our life is connected, our digital identities is key to preserve our safety in the internet. And so today, Mike will tell us about the digital identity and verified credential, important legal, technical, and policy considerations. Mike, all yours.
Thank you, Tina. Could you, is it possible to get the presentation up on the screen?
You can share it.
Oh, I can share screen. Thank you very much. Can everyone see the screen right now, currently?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So before I begin, for the fellows in attendance, I don't know your particular academic background or field of study, but what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about myself. As I said, as both an engineer and as an attorney, I look at this from both a technical as well as a legal lens. And I think it's important to look at this because much like a diamond has multiple facets, depending upon which facet you're looking at on this issue, there are different perspectives. So I think this is a particular subject matter in which you need to take a very holistic view. So the first slide that I would like to talk about, and this is probably one of the most important slides in the deck, and let me explain why. Digital identity and verifiable credentials are a very evolving area. There's a lot of interest, and unfortunately, different people in different sectors sometimes use different terminology. And it's kind of like the Tower of Babel. When people are talking, have different definitional terms, that leads to confusion. So what I'd like to start off with, and I think which is always the best, is in talking about digital identity and verifiable claims, to start with those terms that are used in the cybersecurity world. So one of the things that those from the IT sector should be familiar with is the term ICAM, or Identity Credential Access Management. And with this term, there are four distinct concepts, which I think are very important for all the speakers to understand. So when talking about identity or identity proofing, this is to establish that there is a Michael David Palage. And Michael David Palage is different than my son, Michael Felipe Palage. So identity is about identifying the individual, identity proofing. The next concept in the area of digital identity is the concept of authentication. So authentication is when I go to log into a system, is the individual claiming to be Michael David Palage, in fact, Michael David Palage? And there are a number of technological platforms that can be used for authentication. Traditional concepts such as X509 certificates, OpenID OAuth, or as we have heard from some of the previous presentations today, DIDs or blockchain credentials. So that is the authentication, making sure that the person logging is in fact the person who it claims to be. The third important concept is authorization. So those, again, in the cybersecurity world or in the IT space will have heard the concept of zero trust. And the concept of zero trust is once someone has authenticated into the system, that in and of itself is not enough. Authorization goes about providing distinct access to certain data. So once you have accessed the system, you are then authorized to access, read, write, whatever those rights may be. So that is the concept of authorization. And the final concept is credentials. And as you can see in the diagram with the three concentric circles, credentials are what I view them as the glue that binds identity, authentication, and authorization together. And an example of a credential would be, I, Michael David Palage, have a degree in engineering from Drexel University, and I have a law degree from the Temple University School of Law. So these are credentials that can be used in broader ecosystems for purposes of establishing trust. So I will now go to the next slide. So one of the things, and depending upon the fellows, and this is something where I show my age a little, because while a lot of younger people, like my son who's in university right now, he appreciates ICAM, he appreciates digital identity as someone who is studying cybersecurity at university. But what's interesting is when I talk to some of my older peers, they always say, why now? They'll say, Mike, digital identity, they tried this in the 90s, in the 2000s. What's different today than what was different in the past? And I think the fact that we're having this conference, and as Tina alluded to, most of our social interaction over the last 6 to 9 months have almost been exclusively virtual. So the perfect storm, or in this case, the perfect COVID storm, has resulted in a lot of companies expediting their transition to a work from home or a virtual workplace. Now, what's interesting is even before COVID, there actually was another perfect storm or alignment. And this is kind of a joke that I used to say when I used to give this presentation in person was, what are the three things that you would not expect? And what I've done here is I've identified three things in the area of digital identity. The first is the UN Sustainability Development Goals, specifically SDG 16.9, which talks about providing legal identity for all by the year 2030. The second is the European Union and their work with EIDAS, which is the Electronic ID Authentication and Trust Services Directive. This is actually viewed as a complement to the GDPR, and again, is part of the overall push of the EU to bring about enhanced digital rights and protections for consumers and businesses. The third is a presidential executive memorandum signed last year that talks about it is basically the northern light for ICAM for the federal government. And the joke that I tell is, please tell me the last time that in the last 3.5 years, the U.S. Trump administration, the European Union, and the UN has agreed on anything. That generally has not happened. And I think that, again, even before COVID happened, the issue of digital identity was something that was already here, was going to be happening. But what COVID has done is, instead of this evolution taking place over a 3 to 5 year period of time, we have basically seen this reduced to 6 months to a year. So these are changes that have happened and will continue to happen. The next slide that that you see on the screen right now talks about the concept of a trust framework. So just like that last slide was more geared towards the cybersecurity or the IT fellow, what we're now going to talk about in the concept of identity is more what you would call public policy or governmental affairs. And the concept of trust frameworks is how particular individuals or organizations within an ecosystem can establish trust. Because one of the things that people talk about, they sometimes joke about the original sin of the internet, was there was no identity built into the original stack. And that's not unforeseen. The original internet, when Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, Crocker and the others moved forward with it, they basically knew everyone. They never knew that they were building a network that was going to be used by billions of people. So that was, I would say, again, an afterthought. Now, there have been some steps to increase security, such as DNSSEC and other initiatives, but identity is still one of, I think, a missing link in recognizing the full potential of the internet. So in these concepts of trust frameworks, these are some of my viewpoints on what a good trust framework should account for. I believe there needs to be a strong public-private partnership. And the reason I strongly believe in this public-private partnership is because that particularly in light of a lot of the economic downturn in the economy, governments are going to have limited budgets in the near foreseeable future. So the ability to invest in digital infrastructure, to design it, deploy it, to maintain it solely by the government alone will be difficult. Now, there are some governments, such as Estonia, that had done this, but they had done this back in the early 2000s. So they've actually had about 15 years to get it right. I believe also that there should be a free marketplace. I think that allowing individuals and companies to choose who their identity providers will be, that free market it will help spur innovation and competition. And this is analogous to what has happened in the domain name space. While there is VeriSign that operates the .com registry, there are a number of ccTLDs that compete, .br, .ar. There are a number of .co. So there are a number of ccTLDs, not only in Latin America, but literally throughout the world, that compete with the gTLD space. And what's interesting is not only do you have competition among the registry operators, you also have competition at the registrar, the GoDaddies, the Tucows of the world that are sitting there trying to provide these services. Again, I think one of the most important critical things in any type of this analysis is the need to ensure that there is interoperability for fellows. I would actually encourage the IT fellows to read this as well, and let me explain why. The ITU did a phenomenal job in authoring this particular study. It's called Digital Identity Roadmap Guide. And what it does is it provides a framework for governments to either amend or propose new digital identity laws. And what I was really impressed with by the ITU in this document is it did not take a one-size-fits-all approach. It actually recognized that there are a number of different frameworks in which identity could grow and foster within a particular government. And again, those three kind of high-level models which I've identified here is the one where the government is directly involved as the identity provider. That is sort of what you would see in Estonia, where the government is actually issuing government IDs with the chips, and then there's also chips in the cell phones, etc. There's then the model in which the government only acts as a regulator, and this is something that has happened in the UK with mygov.uk, where the government itself did not want to sit there and become directly engaged, but instead wanted to set minimum baseline criteria and then allow the private sector to create competition and provide those services to the consuming public. The third is an area where the government actually has a hybrid role, both as a regulator and a potential broker or clearinghouse. This is something that I think would properly describe what is going on in Australia right now, and I will try to talk to that later in the presentation if we have time. So again, this is a really important document. I would encourage everyone to read it because it gives a good framework for how to build out both technology as well as governance. Another slide, and for this would be important for all fellows, whether you're financial, IT, or political science. One of the most a phenomenal resource for anyone wanting to learn more about digital identity and verifiable credentials. The World Bank maintains this resource called ID4D, ID for Development. And they have a phenomenal amount of tools and resources. What I did here is I just identified two of the resources specifically for Latin America. One was a study with Mexico and the other for Peru. But as Olga said at the beginning of this, since this event went virtual and we have fellows from around the world, there actually are probably about, I would say, 30 to 50 studies literally from other regions and parts of the world. So I would encourage everyone to go there. these not white papers, they're actually more of a research. They give the current background of both legal as well as technical, what can be done to enhance it. It really is a phenomenal resource. So now what happens is, I had talked earlier about the concept of digital identity and how that is evolving. And what is interesting is I see an emerging, what I call battle royale. So this is kind of, the title of this slide is more of a tribute to my younger brothers and sister who growing up always used to watch wrestling. I never understood why they liked watching wrestling on TV. I never understood it, but they were passionate about it. So this is kind of one of those steel cage matches where you put all the wrestlers in one ring with the steel cage, and whoever comes out on top will emerge the victor. Now, what happens is there are a lot of different players that are trying to capitalize or leverage digital identity to advance their different business interests. And what I've done here is I've identified those that I think have emerged as clear contenders for this ultimate steel cage match. First, you have big tech, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. Now, what's funny is, as a result of some regulatory review and action both within the US and the EU, this particular class of competitors may find themselves occupied with other things over the next couple of years. But I think when you look at how these companies have been so integrally involved in the evolution of the internet and how we use it in our daily lives, I think you really have no choice but not to discount them. Next, you have big banks. Big banks with digital identity have always been involved with KYC, know your customer. So the ability for them to potentially begin to evolve beyond just banking services and to get into digital identity is a natural extension. And while I would say large banks continue to be rather conservative in their business models, they're not very aggressive, they're actually being forced to do this because fintech, the Intuits, the Experians, the other people that are beginning to get into banking. Google, I think, just announced Google Checking or Checking by Google. So the ability of PayPal to begin to blur the lines of what is or is not a bank, fintech is actually pushing or dragging, depending upon how you want to look at the big banks into this. Payment processors. MasterCard, I am amazed that in every fora that I am involved in digital identity, I don't care what part of the world, there's always MasterCard. I mean, and they have an incredibly talented group of people that are investing heavily in a number of pilots, some with governments, with the private sector throughout the world. So again, I count MasterCard as one of the people. Then you have healthcare, a number of people in the healthcare. This is a little bit more fragmented. One of the other areas that I think is interesting is actually the postal operators. So a number of postal operators have realized that their traditional business models of delivering letters is no longer there. While a number of post offices have begun to migrate over to parcels that are in part driven by e-commerce, here you have the private sector, the Amazon, the FedEx, the UPSs that are beginning to, if you will, encroach upon those business models. So the ability for postal operators, who generally knows where everybody lives and has the ability to reach out and touch most of those people on an individual or on a much more periodic basis, I think that they are a very interesting sector to potentially play. And then we have IoT, which I think is everything from drones to wearables to connected homes and connected cities. And all one needs to do is look at the new Ring portable drone that will fly around your house and monitor it while you're gone, brought to you by Amazon. So again, the thing of identity is definitely emerging. So one of the and so this is this is a little bit of my personal viewpoint here. As I've looked at identity over the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, I've looked at a number of different technologies. As I said, traditional X509, SAML, OpenID, OpenID Connect, OAuth, blockchain. I kind of looked at the whole paradigm of the different technology stacks that could be used to provide digital identity and verifiable claim solutions. And I'm a little biased here because I've actually known Olga through ICANN for over 20 years now. And one of the things that I think is interesting is the ability of the DNS to actually function as a trust anchor. And as using that as a trust anchor for lookup and discovery of these records. And the internet, particularly the DNS, has been proven incredibly resourceful. It literally handles billions of lookups and transactions on a daily basis. So to me, this is one of the areas that I think is very interesting, and two groups that I have followed or have been involved with is one, Lightest, and this was a European Union pilot for 2 years that involved a number of European member states as well as technology companies that worked on using the DNS as a trust anchor. The other initiative is ID for Me. This is an initiative out of Europe among a number of CCTLD operators, notably DENIC, the registry operator of the German CCTLD. And again, the work that they're doing, I think, is very interesting. And just mindful of time, because I know we started late and I want to try to make up some time. I will end with some additional background documents. So hopefully for the fellows that have participated on this session, hopefully I have given you something of value that you will be able to use in your future professional careers. And I just wanted to give you some additional documents here. There is a link to EIDAS, which is the European trust framework that I had mentioned. The Australian government, specifically the Digital Transformation Agency, they have been doing some incredible work. I had mentioned them earlier. This is a URL to their website where all of the material and work they are doing is documented. Another group is DIAC. This is the Digital ID Authentication Council of Canada. And what's interesting about DIAC is it is a public-private partnership. So this is something where really the private sector is leading at the request of the Canadian government. And they have done some phenomenal thought leadership work in the area of trust frameworks. As I said, the Lightest test, I've given the link to that there, ID for Me. And then for those individuals that are interested in blockchain or distributed ledger technology, the work of the WC3 in connection with decentralized identifiers or DIDs, there is a link to that particular reference. So with that, thank you. Hopefully everyone has made it through a very long and productive day. If anyone has the energy for any questions, I would be willing to take them. There we go. So back to you.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I have some questions, but then before Soledad Magnone ask, government didn't qualify for the bottle. Because we have some people here from the government side.
Okay. So they didn't qualify for the what?
For the bottle.
Oh.
You know, the battle royale that you put at the beginning.
well, what happens is, well, no, I would tend to disagree with that, because while there are a number of while there are some postal operators that have been privatized, I would say the majority of them still have very close links The UPU, which is the UN agency that administers the Postal Treaty, has 192 member signatories to that. Again, I think I didn't get a chance to show this, but in Colombia, the Colombia postal operator has actually been doing some work in the area of digital identity that was actually reported in a recent UPU study. So to me, I actually think that the governments do have a role to play. But this gets back to that original document that I talked about the ITU. What is the proper role? And given that government budgets are probably going to be severely restricted in the near-term future, I think it's better if governments provide regulations and a framework and perhaps allow the private sector to make that investment. And not only make the initial investment, but then make the investment to continue that infrastructure is maintained, because it's not just a one-time deployment, it is an ongoing cost. So I would say that governments are there and they clearly have a role, as evidenced in the original ITU governance document.
Thank you. Then another question from Alicia Edith Trejo says, what's the benefit? What is the blockchain's benefit in the digital identity?
So for blockchain, and I've looked at this very closely. Where blockchain has been used is in a lot of the fintechs. While some banks have been, if you will, dipping their toe in the water, most of the more aggressive action or more of the aggressive marketing and investment in blockchain or distributed ledger technology has come in the fintechs. And the one area where I think that could help is in providing services for the unbanked. So I believe the World Bank came out, I believe it was either the World Bank or the ITU, I forget which UN agency, but they identified that there are still about 1 billion people on the planet that are unbanked. So that identifies that there is individuals have fallen through the traditional banking framework or safety net, and the potential ability of blockchain through deployments through fintechs to provide an identity and micro banking or micro financial services, I think is interesting. Again, there are a number of governments, and particularly the Chinese government. The Chinese government has been very aggressive on blockchain, involving the national bank, and it is also a key strategic part of the Belt and Road blockchain initiative.
Thank you. Then one more question. How do you see the Estonian experience?
I consider that amazing. I've had the ability to travel to Estonia and meet with not only their CCTLD operators, but some of the government individuals in charge of identity. And it's funny, I'll show you something right now. I actually have a deck of cards, and it's called CyberSec Stories. And I picked up this deck of cards when I was in Estonia, and I literally had it on my desk, wasn't prepared for that question. But what's interesting is what's so important about Estonia is they were on the receiving end of a crippling cyber attack in the early 2000s. And what the government did is they recognized their vulnerability. And what they did is they put in place an infrastructure for digital identity to help not only build trust, but to increase the resiliency of their of their digital ecosystem. And the reason I was showing you the story about CyberSec Stories is the deck that was given to me was intended for school kids, because they literally want them to understand cybersecurity. This was a game meant for children. And what I find ironic is right now, as Olga said, I live in Palm Beach in Florida in the United States. And, right now we are in the middle of a presidential election where there are state actors that are trying to interfere, and what is and what is not fake news. That used to be real easy to make that determination. It's become a lot harder in the current environment. And that's what I find so amazing about Estonia. They literally view the instilling these important concepts at an early age. And I think that's what's important about this fellowship program. You want to take these principles and concepts and get them ingrained at the earliest point in time, so that as you grow older, you always go back to this core bedrock principle of being able to make certain key decisions.
Okay, thank you. One last question. We need to be closing, but I think this is quite interesting. It says, can you talk about how would this be digital sovereignty?
Yes.
If there were any country that the concept of digital sovereignty if there is any country that's been developing that or applicating that or that using it.
So in the concept of digital sovereignty, I would look to EIDAS, because what EIDAS has tried to do is the European Union has tried to create a framework for all of the European member states to operate. So they literally have an EID node that allows credentials in one member state to be resolved. So I could take my Estonia national identity, and through the EID network as part of the EIDAS framework, use that in a different member state. EIDAS has had some implementation problems. They have not achieved the broadest deployment, and the European Union is in the process of revising that to address that. But that would be one example of recognizing sovereignty, that identity could be you could have your identity with one government, but then use that in other national frameworks or identities. The other thing that, in response to that question, that I would tell the individual to look at is the UPU. So again, I'm going to go back to the Postal Union, and I do work with the UPU, so that's why I know a lot about what they do. The UPU has a standard called S68, which is a digital identity framework. And what the UPU is looking to do is to provide a framework in which these credentials can be used, I would say, on a global manner, while still recognizing the sovereign rights of the issuing member country. So these are some of the things in which I am encouraged. Again, EIDAS, the UPU S68, and I think as you see more and more governments begin to take a thought leadership role here, and this goes back to the original question about where do the governments fit in the battle royale. They have a place, because they are going to be help drafting the regulations and the frameworks to spur this private investment as well as public sector investment.
Do you see any Latin American country doing that?
I have not. To date, I have not. As I said, I was trying to do some research on what the Colombian government was doing with their postal operator. I do think this is something where perhaps one of the things that the fellows may want to look at some of the frameworks, EIDAS, or look at the S68 standard of the UPU. The ITU is also doing some work in this. I believe SG17, I believe, is also doing some work in identity. So if you want to look at creating, respecting sovereignty, but then interoperability on a global scale, if you cannot sit there and get the traction, I would look at MasterCard, because I told you they're everywhere. So if there's someone in Latin America that's looking for a pilot, I see MasterCard everywhere, so you may want to reach out to them. But then you could also, as I said, UN agencies such as the ITU or the UPU, and look to leverage that. So that would, I guess, be my closing comment on that one.
Yep. Thank you, Michael. We are way beyond time. So thank you so much for all the learning. And I'll pass it now to...
¿Me escuchan?
Hola.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Michael. Gracias, Tina. Les agradecemos muchísimo.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tina. We're closing for today after this excellent presentation. And I would like to tell you that tomorrow we're going to have an interesting talk, focused primarily on artificial intelligence, starting at 10 in the morning, UTC -3 with ethics, the Internet Governance Forum, digital corporations, algorithms, AI, daily lives. Then we will continue with inclusion, internet inclusion, creating accessible internet. We're going to have the Minister of Colombia, Germán Rueda, and then at 4 o'clock, we're going to have Belén Urbanesca that is going to be addressing digital tools in order to help empower the most vulnerable sectors of society in Latin America. Thank you very much for attending this session here today, to the students, to the speakers, and hopefully we'll reconvene at 10 Argentine time. Thank you very much.